Thank you so much, Mr. Joyce. I'm now going to recognize myself for a first round of questions. It took 16 years to launch the first commercial human spaceflight after the commercial learning period came into effect in 2005. There have been just 64 total private astronauts sent to space between 3 total companies, with most of those occurring in the last couple of years. A lack of flight data and widely diverse operations have made it difficult to find consensus on workable industry-wide passenger safety standards during the learning period. Ms. Bandla, you highlight in your testimony that Virgin Galactic's Mesa manufacturing complex is intended to accelerate progress from conceptual design to production to final assembly in order to reach a target of 400 flights per year. I'm not sure that the industry can reach this kind of scalability fast enough if we just extend the learning period without thinking through changes. So in your view, how should Congress best extend the learning period while ensuring sufficient collaboration between the FAA, industry, and other stakeholders so the FAA is prepared to holistically regulate human spaceflight safely? And what do you believe to be a proper timetable?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. And you're absolutely right. The intent of the learning period was to allow commercial companies to look at spaceflight in a way that does not have bounds on prescribed regulations. So they had the ability to develop, to test new capabilities, new innovations, collect data, create a knowledge base of lessons learned to inform a future safety framework. And again, you're correct, it took us a longer time than envisioned in that original bill, because commercial spaceflight companies do hold safety above all and are cautious in proceeding forward because we are carrying humans. But we are at an inflection point. The companies here on the panel have entered commercial operations for human spaceflight and are starting to fly for commercial purposes and at that regular cadence that we all envision. So it is now the time to have those discussions. And I completely agree, we should not be moving the goalpost just to move the goalpost. But now is the time, because we have data, we have operators, to discuss what that framework looks like. That's the important part. The learning period should not lapse without having a blueprint for what a safety framework looks like for human spaceflight, so that we can look at what areas need to be regulated, what are the consequences of that, making sure it's still light touch to allow innovation, and also importantly that the FAA is resourced with the funds and the expertise to carry out that framework. So I completely agree, we shouldn't just extend, and there's ways to rather extend, but to transition the industry. Without a lapse of the learning period, we take this time to get industry and government stakeholders together to look at what that blueprint is, and they could include milestones, such as looking at safety standards, how safety standards are working, what area safety standards are being developed in industry, and how we can transfer that to a blueprint that, again, I must state, needs to be in place before the learning period lapses. And in terms of timeline, this is going to take a few years. While we are entering commercial operations, Galactic has flown 9 times, and I still believe that there should be more flights to collect data. So about 8 years is our timeline for ideal timeline for having these discussions.
And do our other industry representatives have anything to add here before I move on to the next question?
I think to your point, one thing we're working with AST on right now is we're in a rule committee thing where the industry gets together and we work together as a team, and we're going to make some recommendations to AST for what those regulations might look like. So I think it's inappropriate to say we're not working forward on those regulations right now. We are actively starting to work those together as an industry team and making recommendations. I think the first step we're doing is we're trying to understand what is the benefit of regulations. Why are we doing regulations? Are they to help the industry? Are they to fill in a safety gap? What is the purpose of the regulations? And then once we understand that purpose for the regulations, then I can think we can start to build some consensus about what those regulations should be. So I think it's important to recognize that we're already actively working that, and it's appropriate to extend this learning period for a significant period of time while we have these discussions amongst ourselves, and we can make coherent and complete recommendations back to the FAA.
Yeah, just one point I'd like to add. It's a great question. You pointed out that we just started flying commercial astronauts just a couple of years ago. So we're still learning. So the learning period is appropriate. And extending the learning period for the kind of time that we're talking about here is not only going to allow us to develop experience through operations and improve our